Hello, friends. We are livid with gladness to be here once again talking about my Vampire the Masquerade tabletop game. One of the things that I find really interesting about the vampire setting is the idea that vampires are parasitic. They are always, even without necessarily realizing it, sort of vibing off of what humanity is doing. So, however humans around them are behaving, vampires are kind of going to be behaving in the same way, even if it's sort of unintentional. Because of that, each of the decades that I've done with this game so far, I've had kind of a different theme to them. The 20s was about the roaring 20s. It was prohibition, flappers, upheaval, crime. The 30s was about the Great Depression. There's this sort of misery and angst and economic collapse. There's a lack of all hope and a lot of suffering and hardship going on. The 40s is about high adventure because they're on an adventure. They're out on this sort of Indiana Jones's wild ride. But it's also about real horror. It's the time when almost the entire world came together in this massive, nightmarish battle. And the 50s is about paranoia, McCarthyism, the Red Scare, the Cold War, the fear that Americans lived in such acute terror that there was this unseeable, unknowable, inexplicable enemy that could be anywhere around you at any time, seeking your destruction. And that paranoia is a major feature that I tried to inject into the 1950s aspects of the game. So the 50s story actually begins with a character who was only in the game for one session, and that is a young gentleman named Patrick. Patrick was played by a guy I know who joined the game, and then after being there for 1 week, decided he couldn't make game anymore, and so promptly dropped out and never showed up again. It was one of those weird situations that leaves you sort of feeling
rejected, thrown away, affected. I don't know what to say.
Patrick's story is that he's a cop, a veteran of the Second World War, and the way we meet him is he gets set on this case where they find a severed head floating on the beach. He begins investigating this head and determines that it's this priest, this Catholic priest. Patrick goes and investigates the church where the guy was working, and he finds lots of strange writings and like mad scribblings. He investigates his home and finds that it's infested with rats and roaches and wasps. They discover that he'd been drinking a lot, very, very heavily, even though he wasn't supposedly an alcoholic or much of a drinker prior to a few days ago. And they also find in his apartment, he has like Bibles that he's laid out in a circle around his bed, which can only be a good sign. The guy who was playing Patrick had actually come up with a whole backstory for him about how he had a wife, he had kids, he had a mistress. He was like this. He was an alcoholic, and so he would go around and he'd be interviewing witnesses, and the witnesses would be talking to him, and he would just like stand there, just like slouched against the wall, like with his fedora pulled down, and then he would just like drink from a bottle of whiskey. He actually seemed like a really cool character, and I was looking forward to getting to play with this drunken, hard-boiled 1950s detective. The last thing that happened to Patrick was he was investigating the priest's office, and he found that it was infested with ants. The ants were not only all over the office, but specifically out the window outside. If you've ever seen the Amityville Horror, the original one, it was I was trying to create that vibe from the Amityville Horror, where like the priest goes up into the attic and there's just fucking flies everywhere, and you can sort of tell that there's something evil about these flies. They're like malevolent in some way. They represent some sort of sinisterness. Patrick discovers that there is like a trail of ants that are like going up the glass of the window outside the office and through this garden, and this very intense ant trail is going across the street and into the sewers. So he and his partner, who's an NPC, they decide, let's go back to the station. It's late at night. Let's find some like city engineers or something, some sewer workers, and tomorrow let's go down into the sewers. And so I figured out, I was like, oh, cool. They're going into the sewers. I know what's down in the sewers. And then he never came back to game.
And rejected.
The next day, he climbed down into the sewers, and he was just never heard from again. But the other player characters are here. Our good old family Bompansero, Enzo, Anna, Nathan. Cassandra, of course, is no longer with us. Her player is now playing a new character, Lupita. The same Lupita from earlier in the game, who has now been turned into a Nosferatu, and strangely has no real memory of exactly what happened to her prior to her embrace. Archibald has also vanished during this period. The guy who was playing Archie just dropped out of game entirely for a long period, and so for most of the 40s and all of the 50s, he was just fucking gone. The game for the rest of the family begins the Culver City Cemetery. Bela Lugosi, the actor, has recently died, and so some of the vampires have decided that since Bela Lugosi has been such an important, iconic figure in the history of vampires, they are going to turn his cemetery into an Elysium. This is a real cemetery, actually, that has a lot of famous people buried in it out by Hollywood, so I figured that makes sense as a vampire Elysium, that they would pick some cemetery full of old, dead, famous movie stars. While they're here, they get some word that there's a problem going on in the city out at this place called the Roadhouse.
A double douche.
Some people who definitely look like vampires have rolled up on motorcycles and are causing a bit of a kerfuffle. They hear about this from the Nosferatu. And so after some general socializing, the sheriff, Nathan, puts together a little pack, including Lupita, and they head off to investigate. What they learn when they get to the Roadhouse is that this biker gang of vampires drove up, parked outside the Roadhouse, got off and walked inside. And the Nosferatu, who happened to be sitting across the street at the truck stop watching this, noticed them and were like, is that another fucking Nosferatu? Do you see that guy? He's obviously not human. And there's some weird Asian dude, and there's a guy who looks like a cowboy dude, and some really big guy, and they all just march into this bar. A couple of them obfuscate before they go in there. One of them just turns into smoke, and they're like, holy shit, we better tell the sheriff. We don't know who these guys are. By the time the sheriff gets there, things have escalated quite a bit. There was a massive gunfight inside. The building caught fire. A lot of the anarch vampires fled on their motorcycles, and then one of them, the cowboy-looking guy, just came out with a woman slung over his shoulder and just marched off into the fucking desert. So the Nosferatu put out the fire, but they didn't go up and tangle with these guys because they didn't want to get killed. And so Nathan goes in to investigate. They find that there's been a massive fight here. A lot of people are dead. There was a big gun battle in this bar. There's also a big battle that looks like it took place inside the men's room. One of the walls has been exploded out. There's a guy who's beaten to death in one of the stalls and got all these weird arcane tattoos on him. I'm like, what the fuck is this? They also go into the dressing room. They find that a bunch of these dancers have been completely mutilated, and Nathan, who by now, in addition to being sheriff, is also a doctor. He's taken the time in the time skip to get his medical degree. He examines all these bodies, and he determines that not only have they been eviscerated pretty brutally, and it appears eviscerated by animalistic claws, like they were torn apart by a bear or something. That's bad enough. But also it appears that a lot of their organs have been partially eaten and chewed on. And so he's thinking, that doesn't look good. This is clearly a problem. We need to find out who these guys are. Nathan and the Nosferatu are running around trying to figure out where these dudes came from, if they've been seen before, asking questions, scouting out. Meanwhile, Enzo gets a very interesting letter. This letter is from an old friend of his named Hogland, and Hogland is a Zmeets. Way back in the 1930s, they had run into Hogland and several other Zmeets when they were working in Vegas. Anna got into a bit of a kerfuffle with one of these Zmeets, who flesh-crafted her and fixated her spine down through herself, and she didn't have the ability to heal out of this. So in the negotiation with the other Zemits, Enzo offered to one of them, Hogland, to make a deal with him to try and fix his niece. And Hogland agreed. And he said, well, yeah, I'll fix her. I can bone craft her back the way she was, for a boon. Now, in Vampire Society, a boon, which is a favor, is currency, essentially. Money doesn't mean a lot to a lot of vampires because many of them are ancient and have tons and tons of money, and therefore they trade in favors. And they have a whole category system of favors, of how valuable they are, how much they're worth, and you trade them back and forth. One of the things that the Harpy does is keep track of the favors. They're sort of like a bank. And Enzo agrees to this. He agrees to owe a favor to this enemy, this Sabbat, Zemits, if the guy fixes Anna. So he fixes Anna, and 20 years go by, and now a letter arrives saying, hey, remember me? Come out to the desert. It's time to talk about that favor that you owe me. So Enzo decides, I'll take Anna with me. Anna's the reason I owe this favor, so I may as well take her along. And the next night they drive out to the middle of the desert out by Vegas someplace. Like that scene in Casino. Just go out in the middle of nowhere to do your evil meeting. At the meeting, Hogland explains to them what he wants them to do. There's a crate, a shipping crate that has been lost. It was supposed to be sent from Spain to San Francisco being a Sabbat city. But it never arrived. And investigating the matter, he's discovered that it was accidentally shipped to Los Angeles. So it should already be in LA, sitting somewhere on the dock. Don't open it, don't look at it, and don't do anything weird to it. Just get it to me, and we'll assume that your debt is cleared. And Enzo knows that this is probably a really bad idea, but a favor is a favor. So he goes and he looks for this crate and cannot find it. It's missing. And in his investigations trying to figure it out, he discovers that it's been picked up just a few hours before he showed up to the docks to look for it. Someone else arrived at the docks, sought the crate out, put it on a truck, and drove it away. In looking into it, he sees that the company that picked this thing up is a company that he's very familiar with. It's a company that's owned by Bertram Tongue. And even if he had not known this, it wouldn't have made much difference, because very soon after, Bertram Tongue shows up and tells him that he has the crate. And not only that, but what's in the crate is pretty bad. It's about as bad as Enzo could have expected. It's another Zemits, a Zemits in torpor. And so they tell Enzo, well, hey, do you think we should tell the prince that you were talking with the Zemits about moving one of them secretly through the ports? Or would you rather we didn't tell the prince about that? Because we don't have to. But you will owe us. And so Enzo has to agree to hand over a life boon. It means I don't just owe you a favor. I owe you my life.
That just sounds like slavery with extra steps!
Enzo already hated Bertram for selling him out to Cowboy Bob like 20 years before, but now he really hates him. This also then leads to Enzo thinking, well, how did the Nosferatu find out about this? In character, his first thought is, well, the only other person who was at the meeting is Anna. So he goes and confronts Anna, and he uses Dominate on her. And Anna tells him no, which is true. But she's also pissed off about it, because, nobody likes to be mind-controlled. The next night, Nathan wakes up and finds out that there was an explosion at Disneyland. A lot of the stuff that happens in this story is not going to make a whole lot of sense. Things just kind of occur. Like, there's a guy goes into the sewer, then there's vampires at the Roadhouse, now there's a sarcophagus, now Disneyland is on fire. And if you're listening to this, you're thinking, like, how does any of this connect? And that's kind of how the players felt at the time, too. This is going on over, at this point, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. that I've covered, but the players were very much like, what the fuck? Like, I don't understand. We can't find the vampires from the Roadhouse. Who were those guys? Who was the guy in the sewer? Like, what happened to that cop character? That, like, that was that connected to what we're doing too? And like, now there's an explosion at Disneyland. What is happening? That's partially by design. A lot of the stuff that's occurring is just occurring randomly. It's all part of a carefully managed narrative that I'm aware of, except for the Disneyland thing, which took even me by surprise, but we'll get to that in a later video. The thing is that I deliberately created a situation where stuff would be happening, and it all happens for a reason, but it feels like there's just random fucking chaos. It feels like there are just enemies at the gate, everyone is betraying everyone, and everything is going wrong all at once. And the players can never catch up or really figure out what's going on. And I was doing that because I wanted to create a sensation of paranoia. Nathan goes down to find out what happened at Disneyland, and which has only recently opened up. Disneyland is new. It's only been open for like a year or two, I think, at this point. And he finds out that last night there was some sort of explosion here. The cops rushed in, and they found dead security guards everywhere. They found that like bombs had gone off in the middle of like by the teacup ride. There was like this car that came zooming out of there and crashed into an ambulance that was on its way somewhere else. It got into a chase with the police. Then there was like this shootout a couple miles away from Disneyland when the car got into the town and like crashed into a wall. And then cops were shooting at them. People were coming out of this car firing weapons. Then a tiger somehow appeared and started mauling policemen. And Nathan is like talking to cops, and they're like, and then this tiger jumped out and mauled an officer. And he's like, what? A what? A tiger? They're like, yes, a tiger. Where is the tiger? We don't know. It just disappeared. It ran away. Then there's also this body. In the car that crashed, the cops have recovered this body, which is like all kinds of crazy messed up. Like, biggest guy you've ever seen. Body is all mutilated and weird. And they took it to the morgue. At the morgue, Nathan finds this body, which is like some sort of weird, basically like a super mutant from Fallout that he finds in there. And the guy also has this giant sword with him, with all these magic runes on it. And Nathan is just like, oh my god. I don't know what this is. But clearly it's not normal. They used presents to like charm away a lot of different cops and doctors, and they like load this body onto a gurney or like two gurneys because it's so big, and then they like bring a car up and rush it out, like push through the thing, and they like someone's like, what are you doing? And they do the Fletch like dropping the clipboard thing.
May I help you, Dr.
Oh, it's me, Dr. Rosenpenis. I'm just here to check out Stanwick's file. Dr. Rosen, and I'm here to get to the records room. It's Dr. Rosen. I want to check the records room. Dr. Rosen. Wait, where's the record room?
Nathan is just like, well, I need someone to figure out what's going on. I need a detective. And he has one. He has a detective, Max Hammer. And Max Hammer is a Malkavian who is one of the deputies. And Max Hammer's gimmick, which I think is stolen from a character that actually exists in the lore, but I can't remember the real name of that character. So I don't think it's Max Hammer. I think Max Hammer is like the name of a character from a Mickey Spillane novel or something. But whatever, it's not important. Max Hammer's gimmick is that he's a detective who was turned into a Malkavian. And his Malkavian delusion is that he still thinks he's a detective, but he thinks he's a detective in like a pulp detective novel. And he narrates everything he does. Nathan will call up, be like, ring Max Hammer. I need you to go down and investigate what the fuck happened at Disneyland. And there'll be like this weird silence, and then this voice will be like, it was the boss again, the captain of the precinct, calling me up at God knows what hour, telling me I had to go downtown. Looks like I'm back on the case. Seems like there was some sort of murder took place at Disneyland. They say it's the happiest place on earth. but I guess it wasn't so happy last night around 11 p.m. And Nathan's like, good. Sounds like he got it. The picture I use of him is just the guy from Miller's Crossing. He just wanders around like Gabriel Byrne from Miller's Crossing with his hat down, where like always in his head feels like it's raining on him and he's in a dark alley someplace, just constantly internal monologuing his own existence in the most melodramatic way possible. The other piece of evidence that they track down from this is there's this guy.
This guy.
Who was driving this car that crashed with the body in it. And this guy is still alive. He doesn't have any legs anymore after the accident, and he's currently unconscious. So they go to the hospital and they talk with Dr. Carter, who runs the hospital there. And Dr. Carter goes to interview this guy. Dr. Carter wakes the guy up and uses Dominate to get him to talk. And from this guy, who's a ghoul, Dr. Carter learns a lot of interesting information. He finds out that this guy is a ghoul for a Sabbat guy named Garza, and that they're here hunting someone who was blood hunted out of San Francisco. The ghoul doesn't know exactly who they're hunting, but the only person who knows is Vilmer, the guy in charge of the Sabbat. He describes him as a guy in a cowboy hat, this big Texan, and so immediately they make the connection like, oh right, the cowboy guy. We heard about him. The Nosferatu saw him. That's who he's talking about. The people who the Sabbat are chasing are called the Lords, but the ghoul doesn't know anything more than that about who they are, just that there was a lot of trouble with them up in San Francisco. They were fighting with the Sabbat. They ran away, and Vilmer and his pack were sent to destroy them. When they were sent down here, they were told by the Archbishop up in San Francisco to be careful of the La Sombra and the Defiler and the Doctor. The Defiler was originally Andre the Defiler, and now that he's been devoured by Nathan, Nathan has taken on the moniker Nathan the Defiler, or Dr. Nathan the Defiler.
I didn't spend 6 years in evil medical school to be called Mr. Thank you very much.
They assume that the doctor from Mexico is Dr. Carter, but they don't really know that. Now, during this conversation, in order to avoid having a situation where I talk to myself, because I always hate doing that. I always hate being like, okay guys, these two NPCs talk to themselves. And it's like, what do you think? What do you know about the guy from the Sabbat? Well, I think he's like, that's just like so weird to me to do that. So what I will often do is I will allow a player, whenever I can, to play an NPC. And the logical person to play Dr. Carter is Nathan, because Dr. Carter is Nathan's sire. So this entire scene is taking place just in a room with just Dr. Carter and the ghoul. There's no one else there. And my sister, who plays Nathan, is role-playing as Dr. Carter. So she asks me, well, if I'm Dr. Carter, do I know if that's me that they're referring to? Do I know, am I the doctor from Mexico? And I said, well, Dr. Carter would know that yes, he is the doctor from Mexico. Dr. Carter originally comes from Ireland. However, he spent most of his life in Boston. And after he was turned into a Malkavian, he left and he started traveling all over the place. Eventually, he heard about the Sabbat and he headed down into Mexico to sort of figure out what the deal was with them, because he's a very curious and very arrogant individual. And on his way down there, he ran into the Sabbat. Because Dr. Carter is a Malkavian and an especially potent one, a very powerful Dementor, he was able to twist the minds of these other Sabbat that he ran into and convince them that no, he's just one of them. He's here to join the Sabbat just like they are. And they fell for it.
You know what we call that? Mind-taking, baby!
And they inducted him into the Sabbat. And he was there for years, and one of his packmates was Vilmer. Eventually, though, there was just kind of a general falling out. Vilmer and Dr. Carter both fled. They haven't really seen each other since. And since Dr. Carter came up north and ran into the Camarilla, just like he had with the Sabbat, he just told them, oh no, of course, I'm definitely on you. I've always been a member of the Camarilla. Don't worry. And again, everyone just bought it. So Dr. Carter then asks, where is Vilmer? Where is Vilmer now? And the ghoul doesn't know. The ghoul knows the locations of a few different safe houses that they've been using around the city. And then Dr. Carter asks one last thing, which is, he asks, who is the Lasombra? And the ghoul says, the prince. The prince from Rome. We were told she's a Lasombra, and to avoid her. Players, they just get very, very upset about this. Divya is the prince of the city, and she is from Rome. She's Divya of Rome. And Divya is a Ventru. Enzo is a Ventru, and Enzo's sire is Lacroix, whose sire is Divya. So as far as Enzo knows, she has to be a Ventru, because otherwise he wouldn't be one. This archbishop up in San Francisco, who they already are aware has known Divya for hundreds of years, who claims that she's a Lasombra. The Lasombra are kind of the reverse image of the Ventru in a sense. They're very similar to the Ventru in some ways, but very different in other ways. Both clans are fixated around the idea of power and control and manipulation. The Ventru are very Game of Thrones, where it's all about lineage and right to rule, whereas the Lasombra are more like The Wire. It's about street smarts and your ability to make something of yourself, even if you started with nothing. Since the separation of Camarilla and Sabat, these two clans have been bitter enemies. So the idea that Divya is a Lasombra is very disturbing. Now, the best part about this is that none of the players actually hear this. None of them do, because none of them are in the room. And as soon as the conversation is over, Dr. Carter does exactly what he would have done if I had been playing him, which is he just turns up the morphine on this guy and lets him code out so that no one else can ever talk to him again. He goes back and relays to Nathan the information that he wants to tell him. These are the locations where they've been hiding. But he doesn't tell him any of this nonsense about him having been previously in the Sabat, or the idea that Divya might be a Lasombra. He doesn't bring any of that up. And so in character, the players don't know this. But that's fine. It doesn't matter, because I don't really need or want for the player characters to know this in character. I want for them to know it in such a way that it creates a feeling at the back of their minds. A feeling of doubt or paranoia. So now Nathan, when he gets this information, he then asks, have I ever heard of the Lords? Because Nathan has eaten a lot of vampires. He's diablerized a lot of vampires and absorbed a lot of their memories. Why don't you roll to see? And he rolls pretty well. And so I say, yeah, you have heard of this before. But it's not, you do remember this, but it's not even from Andre's memories that you recall this. You remember it from your own memories, because someone talked to you about this. You just have forgotten it in real life. In the 1940s, you guys hung out with a guy named Fadlan. And Fadlan was one of the Banu Hakim, or as they are also sometimes called, the Assamites. The Assamites are basically like Assassin's Creed vampires. Like, that's the easiest way to describe it. They're Islamic holy warriors who battle evil, but they're also vampires.
I kick ass for the Lord!
It's a stupid, lame thing, but that's what they are. When you were talking with Fadlan, he mentioned the Lords. They were some other faction of vampires who the Banu Hakim had been battling for years, for centuries, and had ongoing wars against. And the reason that Fadlan brought this up was that he mentioned that the Banu Hakim were the ones who had rid the world of the Lords, or as they also are sometimes called, the Bali. The Bali are, they're bad news. They're demon worshippers, in short, infernalists, as that's often referred to. And one of the things that they're most famous for is their part in the destruction of Carthage, where they were the ones who were encouraging the vampires who ruled Carthage, who were mostly Bruja, to get into all this demon worship. Like, hey, you wanna worship some demons, maybe? You think? And the Bruja were like, nah. Tell me more. And basically, this was one of the reasons why, or at least one of the excuses why the Venture decided to march down there and wipe Carthage off the face of the earth. Because you had all these vampires down there who were consorting with demons. And even though vampires are the bad guys, they're not generally stupid. So they're not really a fan of consorting with demons. If you've ever read, what was it? Every horror book ever written, you probably are familiar with the idea that if you make deals with demons, that rarely goes well for you or anyone else. And that's pretty much the way it works in the World of Darkness too. You know, most vampires are pretty strongly in the no, do not talk to demons category. And the ones who do talk to demons, when the other vampires find out about it, they're like, what did we say? You know, they usually kill them. The Bali are theoretically eradicated. They supposedly have been wiped off the face of the earth entirely centuries ago. But you know how it is with terrible things. Following this, Nathan goes on a series of investigations with a bunch of the deputies and the Nosferatu, tracking down these different locations that he was given. And it's also at this point that they notice this raven who has been following them. Raven, tell me your secrets! They talk to the raven through animalism. The raven tells them that it's following them for its master, the man in the hat. So they tell the raven, look, we want to talk to the man in the hat. Can we do that? And the raven's like, yeah, I can tell the man in the hat that you want to talk. So Nathan sets up a meeting with this guy at the cemetery by Bela Lugosi's grave. And lo and behold, Vilmer actually shows up to this meeting. Since Nathan and Vilmer are both hunting the same enemy, and since neither the Sabbat nor the Camarilla have any reason to like the Bali, they decide to team up. Secretly, of course, because obviously if they told their superiors they were teaming up, that wouldn't go over well. Nathan also asks about what happened at Disneyland, and Vilmer tells him, look, dude, that was completely not my fault. That was just an accident. We were just having a meeting with the Anansi, and these Nosferatu just showed up and started throwing grenades at us or something. And Nathan's like, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. What's an Anansi? Vilmer also then tells him that they've been talking to this Malkavian named Mr. Pickle. And Nathan is like, who the fuck is Mr. Pickle? And Vilmer tells him he's that Malkavian that you guys have, the one who lives in the Natural History Museum. Nathan's like, yeah, sure. Anansi, the Malkavian of the Natural History. I'm the sheriff. I know what's going on in my city. You don't need to tell me, okay? So Vilmer tells him, basically, look, I am totally fine with teaming up. We kill the Bali, we get to go home, you get to stay here, everybody's simpatico. Only thing is, obviously, we can't be seen to be working together, and also I should let you know there is this Templar who's running around, who I have no control over, who is also here to hunt the Bali. A Templar is a rank in the Sabbat. And it's somewhat similar to a sheriff, kind of. It's a little bit different. The Templar is like a beat stick. It's a badass who is promoted to be like, you seem really good at murdering people. You're a Templar now. I need you to go murder those guys. And that's basically what a Templar is. Nathan then goes to talk to Professor Pickle. Way back in the day when Matilda the Vampire Slayer fled from Dr. Carter, she went to the only person she thought maybe could help her, Professor Pickle. Eventually, he figured out she was a vampire and tried to kill her. Matilda attacked him and fed on him compulsively because her derangement is bulimia. She can't stop herself from feeding, and so drained him dead. And then realizing that she had done that, she gave him some of her blood to try and bring him back to life to save him, turning him into a Malkavian. Didn't really help, though, because his Malkavian derangement is that he does not believe he's a vampire. He believes he's still a human, and that he's still a occult researcher / amateur vampire hunter, and nothing will dissuade him of this. Nathan shows up and finds him, and he's like, that's the same fucking guy that Matilda used to know. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's like, holy shit. And discovers that Matilda turned this guy into a vampire and then just abandoned him. And Pickle has been going on this way. He still works at the museum. He still imagines that he is human. He still goes through the process of acting like a person, And then anything he has to do to like rationalize away or just refuse to acknowledge the fact that like I'm a vampire, he just refuses to acknowledge it. That's his derangement, just total denial. But while Pickle doesn't believe he's a vampire, he is an expert on the subject. So when Nathan shows up and is like, hey, I got a lot of questions about the Bali. Oh, I can tell you all about the Bali.
There was a time, before it all, when heaven's hosts were still one, and humanity was unformed clay. The Word proclaimed, "Let there be light," and there was. But the darkness had spawned its own children, and they suffered beneath the brand. The sky was ablaze in those days with wrath. The children of night left their heavenly moorings like falling stars, most reduced to blackened husks. But some survived and sought refuge in the chasms of the earth, in the lightless depths of fractured ground. Beyond the city of Ashur, the first tribe dug in the chasm for water below the sand, and uncovered one of the children still in hiding there. It writhed and screamed beneath the sun, and it cursed the name of God. Each of its words carried power to shake the earth. The child called out its own name and broke the world with its word, but it could not save itself. It called to its brethren for rescue, but its cries went unattended. Its flesh boiled to the sky as poisonous smoke, but the child's words carried seeds of darkness, and the first tribe was changed forever. The names of the children were burned in the minds of the first tribe, and they could hear their murmurs on the wind. The sleepers whispered to them, and through the moans of the dying, the first tribe learned to burn, and to rape, and to kill. They coveted the gifts of the chthonic sleepers, and they sought them out, and whispered to them as they slumbered. They prostituted their souls to those dark dreams. And when the names of the children were vanished from mortal memory, the first tribe kept faith with them, and they did not forget. And when the children woke and lay waste to everything in the light, spreading plague and darkness with every tightened step, the first tribe would be their acolytes.
Father O'Rourke has gone through this book and marked tons and tons of like page numbers and passages and stuff in a way that doesn't make any sense to them. Now, what I originally intended was that Nathan would look at this and he'd be like, this is complete chaos. Oh, I'll use my ability that allows me to just look at a chaotic pattern and instantly perceive some sort of meaning in it. But he didn't think to do that. Sometimes players forget that they have abilities. It just happens. But he brings it to this Malkavian occult researcher, and he's like, let me look at it. And although he doesn't realize he's doing it, he uses the Eyes of Chaos and does the same thing. And by connecting all the dots on these different page numbers and passages, he's able to create this like chart on graph paper that is a map. And then Lupita looks at the map and is like, that's familiar to me. It lines right up with the sewer system. And in doing that, they find some sort of hiding place in the sewer system. They go down here, and what they find, and it's pretty creepy, is like a bunch of vampires who are on these slabs in a circle. They're all staked, and they have hoods over their heads, and they have like these weird sort of steampunk pipes like attached into them, pumping their blood and life fluids out of themselves into this giant like flask. It looks like something out of like the Frankenstein movie with Robert De Niro in it or something. As they discover this, that's when the Bali show up. They start manifesting these smoke creatures, and then this machine like erupts and ruptures into this giant like Medusa-like woman made out of bugs, like thousands of beetles and worms and rats just all kind of meld together in this huge cockroid humanoid monstrosity that comes after them. Nathan and Anna are trying to fight this thing as it is like rending through them with huge beetle bug claws. And it's not going especially well for them. They're kind of getting their asses kicked. But luckily they realize that the thing is being like regenerated by this machine that's hooked up to these other vampires. And Nathan destroys the machine, which causes this thing to kind of lose solvency before it fully is summoned. And it sort of falls apart into just beetles and bugs, which continue to attack them. They have like swarms of wasps and roaches that are still attacking, but they're not nearly as dangerous in that form. They also get into a fight with this actual Bali, the only actual Bali who's there, this girl who is like summoning these smoke monsters and things. They get into a fight with her, and it's, I think, Anna who like stakes her and knocks her out. Nathan takes the girl back to Divya's castle. Colin Robinson uses his auspex to like peer into this girl and interrogate her psychically and figure out what she knows. And he finds out that there originally were 4 of these Bali. They were up in San Francisco. They were sacrificing a bunch of children trying to summon a demon there, but the Sabbat noticed them. They went after them. They killed 2 of the Bali, and the remaining 2 escaped and fled down here. Right now, their goal is they're going to go to this football game, and they're going to set up a huge bomb underneath the football stadium and blow it up. The bomb is similar to the device that they just found here, where it's partially an explosive device, but it's also like a demonic summoning thing. It will summon this huge monster who will wreak havoc and kill everyone in the stadium, and then sort of dissipate into a bunch of beetles. The reason for this has to do with the philosophy of the Bali, which is weird. The Bali, a long time ago, made a deal with these demons that they would serve the demons in order to be rewarded once the demons woke up and took over the world. As the Bali got to know the demons better and better, however, they started to realize that this was a bad idea. Making deals with demons, not smart. And the Bali realized this, and they're like, oh, we have made an error. And these demons are not going to reward us. They're just going to enslave and murder us like everyone else. That's not ideal. So what they have determined is that the demons are currently sleeping. And they're cool with sleeping. They're okay with that. Because the demons are under the impression that the world is the same as it used to be when they were around. Monsters and demons walking around slaughtering people. The rain is blood and the sky is chaos and everything is nightmarish and terrible. And that's what they like. It's just like, sounds awful out there. That's perfect. But if the demons get whiff of like, things are okay up there, they're going to be like, well, that's no good. Now I got to get up and go to work and ruin everything. If it's already ruined, I can keep sleeping. But if it's not ruined, I am the one who has to do the ruining. It's kind of odd, I guess. But I suppose you could think of it like if you looked outside and you saw that your lawn was the right length, you're like, good, I don't have to mow the lawn today. And maybe if there was someone who for some reason really didn't want you to mow the lawn, like the lawn people who their lives were blades of grass and you mowing the lawn was murder to them, maybe they would come up with some elaborate scheme to take a photograph of like a perfect lawn and then like tape it to your window, so when you look out you're like, looks good, don't need to go mow the lawn, okay. But if one day the photograph falls down and you look at it like, what the fuck is with my lawn, you're gonna go out and mow all those little grass people. This metaphor has really gotten away from me. But anyway, so the Bali's job, as they see it, they have to keep convincing the demons who they worship, they have to keep telling them, like, don't worry, it sucks up here, dude, like, it's so terrible. You don't, like, if you woke up, it would be a waste of your time. You couldn't possibly make it more horrible than it is. But every once in a while, the demons are like, what is that noise? Did I hear someone having fun? And the Bali are like, no, look, we summoned a monster and it ate an entire football stadium. That's the way it is every day. And the demons are like, okay, I guess I can go back to sleep then. That is basically the history of the Bali. The thing is that no one else really knows this or believes this. 90% of people think the Bali are all dead anyway. or they never existed. The ones who actually know about them are like, yeah, those fucking demon worshippers. We're always trying to summon demons and eat people. Fuck them. There are a few people who are like, would know, like, the Bali, they think that what they're doing is right and that they're saving the world somehow. But I don't think they believe it. If they did believe it, they probably would join the Bali. So, are the Bali correct? I don't know. But from the point of view of everybody else, the Bali are just like dicks who are always trying to fuck everything up. Like what they're doing right now. So we gotta stop them. And the real tragedy of all of this is that the Bali are planning on blowing up this football stadium on the same fucking night as Nathan's big party. Nathan has planned a giant party. It's the party celebrating the end of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s. It's 1956, and it's taken him a while to get around to it. But he's really insisted that it's going to be fun. He's invited a lot of vampires, a lot of his friends from Hollywood. Orson Welles is going to be there, Marilyn Monroe, both Bogey and Bacall. So he's got to strategize. He's got to start his party. Then he has to get together a kill team, drive across town, fight some, interdimensional demon summoners. Then he has to drive back to the party, change his clothes, because they're going to be dirty. The night of the party arrives. After talking with like Ray Bradbury and Marilyn Monroe and some various other people, Nathan and his deputies, a bunch of the Tremere, Enzo, Anna, and Brother Bray all head off to this parking garage. As soon as they go in there, immediately the place like goes dark and demons, like these little ghost skeleton things, start summoning out of the concrete and rushing at them. They're not particularly dangerous, but they keep regenerating. And as this is happening, Simon figures out that they're inside a giant summoning circle. And also, the Sabbat all show up. Vilmer's pack arrive. And they're all chasing around fighting these demons, trying to find this Bali, who eventually they do find at the highest level of this parking garage structure. When they get up there, two things happen. First is that the Bali witch summons this monster, this demon, to come rushing at them and attack them. The second is that the Templar arrives. The Templar just comes bursting through, and she looks around. She points through the crowd right at Simon. And she says, "I've come to tear out your heart, Simon the Devious." Now, way back in the 40s, when Cassandra was being locked up into the Iron Maiden and in the boo box to be dumped in the ocean, she was screaming various threats and things at people. And one of the things that she screamed at Simon was, "She's still alive, and she's coming to tear out your heart." And when she said that, it was just like, I don't know where she came up with that. She just said it randomly. But because she's a Malkavian, because she's supposed to be a prophetess, and she just said some random cryptic thing, I had Simon react as if he was like, "What?" But I was like, I'll remember that. And I did. And this Templar has come all the way here from Europe, specifically to kill Simon the Devious. He's killed a lot of Sabbat over the years. Among those battles was one against this Templar, who he hurled into a active volcano. But, as we will repeatedly see in the stories to come, picking someone up and throwing them into a source of fire doesn't always kill them as effectively as you think it might. Unfortunately, this battle doesn't go especially well for the Templar or for the Bali, mainly because of Enzo. Enzo just starts using Dominate to throw people around and really fucking them over with it. Dominate is a very difficult power to deal with in combat, because in a lot of situations it doesn't necessarily matter if you're a lot stronger and a lot meaner and a lot more dangerous than someone else. If they can just look at you and mind control you, they win the fight real fast. The Bali gets screwed over badly in this character. I mean, the Bali, there's only one of them. And with all of these enemies arrayed, even with this army of demon stormtroopers, it doesn't really work out. The only notable character who gets killed is Brother Bray, which I was really disappointed by because I liked the Brother Bray character a lot. He was funny to roleplay. Everyone enjoyed him. It was like not a lot had happened with Brother Bray since the 20s, and it was finally time for some storyline stuff to happen with the Wyatt family, and then he kind of died just right at this very inopportune moment. They stomped the shit out of these guys, basically. They destroy their summoning circle to despawn all of their stormtroopers, and once that happens, the Bali is really just one kindred versus like 20, and doesn't last very long. The Templar gets killed, and then after the battle is ended, there's this brief little standoff between all of the Camarilla and this Sabbat pack. They have a moment of silence there where they're kind of sizing each other up, and then Vilmer says, "So what I'm thinking happened is we rocked in here to kill the Bali. You all came in unbeknownst to us. The Bali and the Templar killed each other, and since our job was done, we just left." And that's exactly what they do. It was a really fun storyline. You had a lot of stuff going on that didn't connect and didn't make sense. That feels even more so the case in this video, because there's some stuff that has been left out because I'm going to talk about it somewhere else. But it started as this very confusing open puzzle, and then it pulled together really well, which doesn't always work. The Bali are some of the coolest villains in World of Darkness, maybe the coolest. Their philosophy and their ideology is really bizarre and interesting, and that's cool. And also they're meant to be really scary and creepy. They're supposed to be like they're the faction of vampires who all the other vampires still find really disturbing and weird. And they're always like killing people and sewing them up and filling them with bugs and hatching larvas and summoning demons, and it's all just fucking creepy and bizarre. And a lot of those moments where the players were going through the sewers and finding like body parts full of writhing masses of cockroaches and larvae, and they were like so creeped out by it in real life, worked very well, I thought. All of the interconnectivity of the Sabbat, who they thought were anarchs, but then they weren't, and there's like a tiger, and there's apparently something in Disneyland called the Anansi, and maybe the prince is a Lysandra, and Enzo is moving Sabbat around, and we don't know why, and someone betrayed him, and we're not sure who it is. It all helped to form this sense of paranoia, I would say, which sometimes can be hard to do. But in this case, I think it worked reasonably well. So that's the story, and we'll see you next time.